So, of course, now that we've heard the sound, that brings us to talking about Thomas Edison and what he invented. Now, Thomas Edison did not, at first, create the first phonograph to look like a record as we know it now, a vinyl record that is a disc. What he did was he created something that looked like a cylinder. It looked more like this. It was a cylinder and it spun. I'm not gonna. It spun on its side like this. I can't do it because there's actually like water in here. Okay, it spun on its side like this, and a needle sat on top of it and read side to side. The reason that he eventually switched it to being more like a disc is because when he first invented it, the story goes that it wasn't designed to be mass produced ever. These were designed to be like ways to hold documents, ways to preserve languages that were dying, ways to preserve historic moments. And you would never want to mass produce the things. They would always just kind of be sitting in a vault somewhere. But in not too long, people found that this idea of like having music in their house without performers was kind of amazing. They could use this contraption to play music. So Edison started making these with music on them. And it was like kind of a crazy idea. And then the idea came to mass produce these things and sell them. And he in fact did. And Edison Studio was the first record company that existed. But these cylinders had this problem that they were very difficult to mass produce and they were very fragile. So he went back to the drawing board and eventually came up with a disc. The disc could be made into a stamp so that they could just like stamp them out and make them very fast. Whereas the cylinder, being more three-dimensional, couldn't be made into a stamp and therefore was very hard to mass produce. The disc was also a lot more durable than the cylinder, although the early discs were a much thicker vinyl and they did shatter kind of a lot. I have a collection of really old records that are kind of half shattered. But as we kept developing it throughout the decades, throughout a century and a half, the vinyl record became much more durable. It is still somewhat fragile, and we also developed other ways to access analog recordings, like tape. There is analog tape that we use for recordings. But at some point, practitioners of recording started to look for a way to record at a higher fidelity and get away from this idea of an analog recording where it was just a representation of the waveform on the thing, on the piece of media. And luckily for them, there was this newfangled thing called the computer, and that made a whole new kind of audio possible. That was digital audio. So let's go to a new video and talk about the origins of digital audio.